How did this flower at the front go from this to this, whilst the ones behind remain untouched? And how can you protect your potted plants from slugs and snails this well? That is what I'm going to show you in this video, where I test the best slug and snail barrier I've ever tested. First of all, I'm going to show you how they work. Put some plants on top. Awesome plants, just like this. Fill it full of water and then secure it using the 4 holes for screws and bolts. The slugs can't reach from here to here, and once filled with water, the slugs can't swim across the water and climb up to the plants. So let's get back to the experiment. Here you see a snail on the left dipping its head in the water, testing how deep it is and trying to find a way over to the plants. And also in the middle you can see the first leaf on the central plant gets eaten. Later on in the video I show you an example of how a slug may occasionally cross the barrier, as one gets much closer than this one on the left, which makes a big reach through the water, but it can't make it over. So it decides to make its way over towards the central plant, which isn't protected by a slug stand, and is clearly much more vulnerable to being eaten by slugs and snails. So in this close-up, multiple slugs try hard to cross the water, stretching to full length whilst making sure they don't drop in the water. Slugs can go underwater, however they risk drowning, especially if it's deep and steep-sided like the Slugstand. I think slugs and snails will generally avoid water unless out of absolute necessity. And as the video continues, I want you to bear in mind there's no such thing as a perfect slug barrier, and to be completely honest about my product, I'll go through the advantages and disadvantages you may not have thought about, including that footage of how a slug almost makes it over the barrier. At this stage, still no slug or snail has come particularly close to crossing the water barrier, and the plants at the back remain untouched, whilst the central control plant is really taking some damage, with the slugs moving their heads left and right, hoovering up the leaves. A slug comes up on the right that makes a bit of a vertical reach, and even though he's a big slug, he can't get over the barrier. Now, just before I give away the main positives you may not have thought about, I want to let you know that if you want a free copy of a PDF which contains my evidence-based flowchart of steps you can take to prevent slugs and snails in your garden, then there's a link to that in the description below, as well as a link on where you can buy the product, which as you can see is working well. And if we don't yet ship to your country, please leave a comment with where you're from below, and it will give me a good idea on where to start selling next. So before I showed you mainly the slugs trying to cross horizontally, but often they try and reach upwards as well, and this is a close-up example of that. The slug is at full stretch towards the camera, showing its pale underside, with its upper tentacles, which you can see from and smell from, fully extended towards the plants above. So for some of the advantages of the Slugstand you may not have thought about, it's a good quality long-lasting product that doesn't need repeat purchases like types of pellet, and it won't be easily damaged if used correctly. It's also not harmful to other wildlife, pets, or even slugs and snails, so that helps leaving food chains uninterrupted. Also, it works better than all barriers that I've seen or tested. If you think you know of a better one, please let me know in the comments, and I'm more than willing to buy it and test it. And at the end of this video, there will be links to other videos where I test the Slugstand against other barriers and test other popular barriers like wool pellets, copper tape, coffee granules individually. There's also infinite configurations you could use the Slugstand with. You could place a table on top in a greenhouse to protect your seedlings. You can place a shelf on top like here and load it up with plants. You can also place planters on top as large as you want, increasing the amount of Slugstands for increasingly heavier planters. You can even protect individual plants by partially burying the stud stand and growing through the hole in the top. However, it is of course possible that slugs may try and dig underneath. Now as I start some footage of how a slug nearly crosses, I'll go through some of the downsides of the Slugstand. Here it looks like there's 2 slugs, but this one here is actually about to fall in. A slug won't drown instantly as they can hold their breath for quite some time and can crawl along underwater, which is what's happening here. However, they really don't like to go underwater, as they risk dying. However, if they fall in, or there's an easy point for them to get in and out, like in a shallow pool, it's not an issue for them to go underwater, but the steep slides of the Slugstand will generally put them off. Here's a bit like a scene from The Lion King as Mufasa the slug holds on, but falls in again as he struggles for his life, and you can see the pale underside of his body as he flounders underwater. So potentially he could have climbed back up along the central island and defeated the Slugstand barrier. Even though he didn't on this occasion, that's the main vulnerability, as well as vegetation growing large nearby and acting like a bridge to surpass the barrier, and of course evaporation. However, there's a large capacity of water, and it should remain full enough for days, if not weeks, and you can always consider adding salt if you're sure it won't overflow, and if it evaporates it will leave a salty residue in the slug stand which will be difficult for it to pass. Whilst Mufasa struggles underwater, I'll go through some other disadvantages. Number 2 is probably mosquitoes, so it's definitely worth overflowing the water occasionally or tipping it out so you don't get bitten to death. The third disadvantage I'd say is instability. However, this is why I sell them as a pair, and we put 4 screw holes in the top so you can fix it. So using some common sense, this shouldn't be an issue. Number 4 is we're not using recycled plastic, but it is recyclable. We did want to go recycled, however it needs strong structural properties, so we were advised against this. And number 5, it's more costly than other slug products, but that's due to it being much larger, around 34 centimeters in diameter, and thick because it can hold 40 kilo weight. So it's more expensive to ship and manufacture than other products. Also, I'm doing this on a tiny scale. However, I know I'm biased, but it does work much better than the other products, and it should also last a lot longer. So I think after seeing this video, you'll agree it's a good barrier. But how does it compare against other popular barriers? Well, you'll find out if you click on one of the videos at the end screen.